Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Caribou Prince George.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm honoured to take part in this evening's debate. As those of you around this chamber know, I've been a huge proponent of raising mental health issues and suicide prevention issues since the first day I was elected. I know that we have made huge strides as a society when it comes to mental health, but we have so much further to go. There was a time not so long ago when people were embarrassed to talk about their struggles. Feeling sad, hurt, or upset was something to be ashamed of. Growing up, we were taught to internalize our feelings. We were taught that we didn't air our dirty laundry in public. We were taught that any showing of weakness was a failure of character. It was always just better to keep it inside. I want to say that this was just a sign of the times, but I think that it goes much deeper than that. I believe that we felt this way because we were scared. We didn't understand the full impact of depression. We didn't understand the impact mental health has on physical health. We didn't understand how many people actually struggle with mental health issues. Now, over my time as a Member of Parliament and the work that I did previously, I've heard from first responders, firefighters, police, paramedics, nurses, soldiers, everyday Canadians, that even though we can now talk openly about these issues, there is still such stigma attached. No one actually owns up to it, but it's still there. Even as far as we have come, those feelings of weakness of character still persist. Education has been key, and recent statistics show that mental illness will directly affect 1/3, precisely 9.1 million Canadians over the course of their lives. Prior to the pandemic, in any given year, 1 in 5 Canadians experienced a mental health issue. While statistics are not yet available post-pandemic, we know that the number of Canadians who have experienced mental health issues will be more than 1/3. The effect COVID restrictions have had on mental health may never fully be known, but they will last generations. Being locked up, confined to our homes, is not natural. By nature, we are social beings. We need that personal interaction. Over the course of the last few years, we've witnessed a change in how we deal with mental illness. Bell Let's Talk Day is just one example. We've tried to talk more about depression, about mental health. We've talked more openly about suicide. We've talked more openly about post-traumatic stress disorder. We see more programs, more apps, more supports being offered, and while this is good, it's not good enough, Madam Speaker. We need to work together with the provinces and find a way to put mental health on par with physical health. We need to work together to find more support services for those that are suffering from severe and persistent mental health issues. I often say there's no health without mental health. As a matter of fact, the minister just mentioned that same quote. We need government and business to work together to effect this change. In all of the recent studies done, we see poor mental health cost Canada $50 billion a year in lost productivity. Mental health problems account for approximately 30% of the short and long-term workplace disability claims. This is an astronomical sum to me. I can't help but believe there has to be a better way. My grandma used to say that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This old adage would seem to apply here. If we can recognize the symptoms and triggers, we can do a great deal of preventative work. For every dollar spent in mental health, $4 to $10 is returned to the economy. Improving access to treatments for depression could boost our economy by $32 billion a year. This is why New Zealand tabled their well-being budget in 2019, a groundbreaking departure from the norm. This budget provided $455 million for new frontline mental health services, and every aspect of the government policy is viewed through a mental health lens. Suicide prevention received a $40 million boost. The government worked to provide $320 million to address family and sexual violence to improve the lives and the mental health of children. Madam Speaker, I tell people back home that I'm the luckiest person alive. Being a Member of Parliament feels more like a calling than it does a job. To stand here in this chamber and have the ability to affect change is truly an honor. It's truly humbling. Now, I've traveled the world representing our community and our country. I've seen and experienced things that most people will ever read about. And now I'm a 3-term Member of Parliament representing one of the largest ridings in our country. Yesterday was my 7-year anniversary, as a matter of fact, of being a member of Parliament. When I asked how I got into politics, my answer is always the same. I never intended to be a politician. I fell ass backwards into a position that I now feel I was born to be in, that I feel maybe it was God's plan for me. What I do know is that I live every day working tirelessly not to perpetuate the dysfunction and the abuse that filled our childhood. In my role as a member of Parliament, when speaking with school-aged children, my goal is always to leave them knowing that regardless of their story, background, or setting, they too could one day find themselves in our nation's highest legislative chamber. An honor that is beyond words. You see, Madam Speaker, while I've never shared this publicly, I live every day with the emotional and physical scars of the abuse that my brothers and I dealt with back home. My hope is always that if someone finds themselves experiencing some or all of what my brothers have, that you see that you can overcome, you're not broken, and you're not weak. Madam Speaker, I can still remember the smell of burning flesh and the sight of my brother's skin hanging off his hand. We were lined up to watch. We didn't know if we were all getting this or if it was just my brother Kevin. The burner had been turned on for some time. It was so hot that it wasn't even red any longer, it was purple. It was a bad day. Why? I don't know. Was the canned food stacked properly? Were the dishes done? Was the garbage out? It didn't matter. Whatever played in her head, we were going to have to pay for it. We'd been here before. We knew what was coming. Just a couple weeks earlier, I'd been in the receiving end of a can of soup that was thrown at me. As I entered the kitchen, as pots and pans clanged violently, the can hit me squarely in the corner of my eye, opening up a gaping gash that required stitches, all because the cupboards were disorganized. As we stood there, tears slowly ran down our cheeks. We were all terrified. She yanked his little arm. He was barely able to reach the top of the stove. And I remember thinking, he even stood on his toes to help her deliver the punishment. She held his arm in place as she placed his tiny hand onto the burner. And I can hear the sound of his flesh burning. Oddly, I don't remember him crying or screaming. Maybe because our screams drowned out his. She didn't even blink as she flung him to the side and looked directly at my brother and I. I can remember Trent and Kevin thrown into their bedroom, something that was knocked over and then slapping around over and over. Their cries and then silence. Did she finally do it? Did her anger and hatred finally boil over to her killing one of us? I share that with you and all of you to tell you that I come at this from a nonpartisan issue. My brother Kevin, who was a victim of that, lives on the streets to this day. He was shot twice with a shotgun last summer. He is gripped in our country's opioid addiction. I lost my brother-in-law to overdose in 2008. Each and every day, I believe that if we as leaders share our stories and tell people and show Canadians that it's okay to come forward, it's okay to share your story, that we will break that stigma. Madam Speaker, I have been a member of Parliament for 7 years and I've cried way too much in this chamber. But I honestly believe if we throw away the talking points and speak from the heart and actually work on tangible things and show those people that are struggling and suffering silently that they too could maybe one day, regardless of where they come from, stand in this hallowed place and be a member of Parliament, then they can achieve anything and they can overcome the abuses that they faced. Mr. Speaker, I live every day for this. I've only got 30 seconds left, but this went so much better in my office when I was rehearsing it. But I appreciate everything that we're doing. Obviously, opening this up opens up a whole can of worms. But this isn't just my story. It's my brother's story. And it's the story of many Canadians that are struggling to this day, that are struggling right now, maybe listening. And if you are struggling, please know that I see you, I hear you, and I'm fighting for you. Thank you.